Okay, so howdy, folks. We are going to talk about information literacy. I'm going to share a whole bunch of lessons that hopefully you will find useful. And I just realized I moved that to the wrong screen. So let me move this back over here because I think you're less interested in my nephew, who is adorable, than in InfoLit, but he is pretty adorable. If you are interested in any of the info that we're going to go over, you don't have to take too many notes because I've got the whole slideshow for you right here, bit.ly/getinfolit. There's going to be a whole bunch of lessons that you're going to be able to basically just take and use. So let me start with a quick little background. So hi, I'm Steve. I was an ELA teacher for 24 years, 23 and a half years. And I was also a hobbyist librarian for a while I was getting my library certificate. And then I transitioned into actually being a school librarian, which I love. And I am currently the Professional Development Committee Chair for the New Jersey Association of School Librarians. My dad likes to say I've got more degrees than the thermometer because I've got a couple of different masters and a doctorate. And yeah, it's I gave Rutgers a lot of my money. That there's not a building named after me there is a little bit depressing. But we are going to dive in, and this is hopefully going to be some audience participation here. So I would love to hear from you. We're going to start with, here is a picture, here is a map. What do you think this is supposed to show us? This is absolutely an audience participation moment. You can either shout it out if you want to throw it in the chat, you can do that. But what do you think this is a map of?
Is it internet activity?
Internet activity is interesting. Population's interesting. Anybody else? Certainly, it seems like it would map really well to those two things. It's actually a heat map of the distance to the nearest McDonald's. Now, if we take that information, libraries, I love that it might be libraries. If we take these different ideas and we start looking at how do these all relate, how do these all connect, maybe we can start to draw some conclusions. And we can use this kind of infographic with students, but we've got to help them understand how they are seeing what they are seeing and how to think about how to apply what they're seeing. This is a different idea, different infographic. This is the full text of Romeo and Juliet rendered as a word cloud. And for those who aren't familiar with word clouds, when you put information into a word cloud, it finds the things that repeat the most and makes them bigger. So the larger something is, the more it repeats. What do you notice about the text of Romeo and Juliet? The eagle-eyed among us might notice a couple of things. More Romeo than Juliet. Where's Juliet? So we've got Romeo real big right here. But then if you look, Romeo is also over here. Why would Romeo be in here twice? And here's Juliet, but then here's Juliet again. Got a couple of Juliets, that's right. Anybody know why Romeo and Juliet are both in here twice? And in fact, if you look, you're going to see that there are several names that are in here a couple of times. It's got to do with capitalization, absolutely right. So this one is all caps. This one is a mix of upper and lower. And this Juliet is all caps, and this one's a mix of upper and lower. Lots of thous, that's true too. Saying thou a lot. But even thou compared to Romeo is almost maybe equal, maybe a little less, right? So this is the text of a script for a play. And when we read a play, there it is, Jane's got it. When they speak versus when they're being spoken about. So when it's all caps, that's somebody saying dialogue. And when it's a mix of upper and lower, it's someone saying the name. So who has the most lines in this play? Very obvious. Here's Romeo. And then Juliet's also got quite a few lines, but not as many as her dad and her mom, because Capulet, mom and dad together, are both Capulet. And we've got Lady Capulet over here. So Juliet has a lot of lines, but not nearly as many as Romeo. And Romeo is talked about a whole bunch because when you look at names that are upper and lower, his is still one of the largest. So he gets talked about a whole lot. Now, before we even go into any of the details of the play, just looking at this word map can give us an idea of some dynamics, some ideas about the play itself, right? So this is information that we can take in a different way. One more. Here's a graph, gun deaths in Florida, number of murders committed using firearms. And then we can see that they've called out in 2005, Florida enacts its stand your ground law, right? So what does this seem to be telling us? Gun deaths in Florida, 2005, Florida enacts stand your ground law. For those that don't know, stand your ground is a law that basically says if you feel threatened in the state of Florida, you're allowed to shoot or do whatever you need to end the feeling of threat to yourself. So according to this graph, what seemed to happen in 2005? So Jamie's paying close attention. Seems like once we get this law in place, deaths go down, right? But here's the thing. If we look carefully, the axis on this graph is opposite of what we would expect. Zeros at the top and the high numbers at the bottom. So the graph, if we don't look at the axis, it seems like once this law passed, deaths went down. But in actuality, deaths shot way up, especially if you look at how they were trending down in small increments, small increments, small increments. We get here, they blast way back up. And so if you look at the source of this, it's the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And this was shared out by Reuters. Now, Sky has got a really good point here. The first time that I saw this graph and somebody pointed out to me that the axis was upside down and the source was the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, I said, law enforcement is trying to make me think that their laws are working the way that they say they're going to work. But here's the thing. At the time, I did not know, and not too long ago, I did a little more, I happened actually to accidentally come across some more context for this graph. And it turns out that this graph was actually created in order to create an art piece. It's more meant to be artistic information than an actual graph. The creator was trying to show dripping blood. And so gun deaths went up and there was more dripping blood. Now, with that context, suddenly I understand that the source means that the information, the data came from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, but not the graph itself. And Reuters reported this because it was part of an article that somebody wrote that was published through Reuters. So it seems, if we don't have the full context, that this was purposeful misinformation. But in actuality, when we know the bigger picture, if we had the article this was in, we would know it wasn't actually purposeful misinformation. It was artistic rendering that, out of context, can be a little confusing. So this is one of the reasons that we've got to think about how we're helping students look at and see what's going on, especially when it comes to information and especially when it comes to images, because we say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, a lot of these have a lot of assumptions built into them as well. So we've got to think about our assumptions. One last one. This one's just a quick one. The impact of smartphones on the camera industry. We look at sales of cameras from 1950 up to 2019. We see that camera sales were way up in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then they drop way off. And they start dropping way off right around the time smartphones take over. And it looks like smartphones basically have replaced cameras, right? When we look at the height of these two curves. But actuality, if we look in, if we zoom in on the axis again, we're going to see that the smartphone axis is 10 times the camera axis. So it's not that smartphones replaced cameras, it's that smartphones almost instantly outpaced cameras. In fact, 15 million, we had 200 million smartphones sold in the same year that 121 million cameras were sold. So instantly, smartphones were more popular and more used than cameras. So that can be a little bit confusing if we're not paying close attention to where different elements are on our graph and what they're trying to show us. So one of the things that I try and always remind myself and my students is that information literacy is about a lot of different kinds of stuff. Graphs, charts, infographics are one of them, but all of them have a lot of things in common. And I would argue that after reading and math, information literacy is probably the most important skill we can teach our students, because we are living in an information age. We literally live in an information age. That's how it's being labeled. So if we're not giving kids skills to deal with information, what are we doing? We're supposed to be getting kids ready for being participants in our global society and democracy. But if we're not arming them with the tools they need to understand information, we are not doing our job. So information literacy gets tossed around a lot. Sometimes it gets combined or replaced with media literacy or news literacy. And I think those are all different things. So to be a little more clear, information literacy, anytime we talk about literacy, we're talking about the skills and the knowledge needed to successfully navigate a particular topic. So if we're teaching kids science literacy, we're showing them how to deal with scientific information, scientific facts. We're teaching them math literacy, technology literacy. Information literacy is the skills and knowledge needed to ethically and successfully navigate the information economy that we live in, and the information age that we live in. So that's going to include some things like research, citation, news literacy, technology literacy, and I would argue digital citizenship is in there too. I think all of those fall under the purview of information literacy, and we'll talk about why that is a little bit. But you're here for a bunch of lessons, which I'm going to give you. There's more than 40 of them ready for you. And I want to just tell you a little bit about how those lessons came about. So I actually started thinking about information literacy quite a bit when I was in my school library media specialist program, because I was an English teacher for, like I said, a couple of decades. And when I was doing that, at no point did I really understand that information literacy was a thing. And I didn't really know how to present it well to my students. There were elements of it that absolutely fit in with my English curriculum. You know, citation and research were things that I discussed, but I didn't have a bigger picture of it. And when I started getting into my school library certification process, I started to see that there was a whole segment of learning that our students probably weren't getting, because classroom teachers kind of focus on their subject areas, which totally makes sense. And information literacy is kind of its own thing. It has tendrils that reach into pretty much every curriculum, but there's not really one place where educators provide a unified sense of, here's a bunch of things that all tie together that deal with how to navigate the world that we're living in. And I think it's really important that we think about this and deal with this, because information spreads incredibly fast. And a scary thing is there have been several different studies that show misinformation and disinformation spread faster than true information. So we've got to be aware of that, and we've got to take that into account, especially since we've got studies that show that more than 3/4 of kids, and this is actually from a year or two ago, so it's probably more than that now, but at least 3/4 of our kids are turning to social media when they're looking for information. They're getting their information from social media. That's a problem. That's a real problem. And one thing that really just shocked me to my core, and again, this is not this year's data, this is from a couple of years ago, kids and teens spend an average of 91 minutes watching TikTok every day. And when I asked my students this, literally just the other day, I asked them, how many of you look at TikTok? Only about half the hands in the room went up. So that means there are some folks who are making up for that average and watching 3 hours a day or 6 hours a day or some other ungodly number. And TikTok, probably not our best source of information, and yet that's where they're getting a lot of their information. These are all linked, by the way, if you want the insight onto where those stats are coming from. And we have seen the fact that information literacy can be a life or death situation, quite literally, not sort of vaguely, but it's actually really true. So we've got to think about how we're arming our students, because even the adults in their lives, I'm going to skip over that, even the adults in their lives are not necessarily good at parsing real information from fake information. You've probably heard about the litter box story. There were several politicians who have said on national news media that, oh, we've got schools that are putting litter boxes into bathrooms because students are identifying as cats. And, this is insane. We can't let this go on. that was a satirical post somebody put out that was then picked up and turned into a real fact. So when our adults don't necessarily have the right information and they're sharing that out, we've got to help our students understand. We know that trained journalists have reporting standards. We know that. Our students may not. We also know, hopefully, that people yelling about things they hate don't have reporting standards or journalistic standards or really any kind of standards. So we've got to think about how are we helping students find reliable sources of information, but also even when they get to reliable sources of information, we've got to think about the fact that even the best news source in the world can't provide us with every single piece of information about every single story that exists. It's just not possible. So even the best news sources are only giving us certain views, certain perspectives on things. So we've got to think about what is it that they're showing us and how can we get a better, fuller picture of what's going on. Just as a fun aside, because I think a lot of us are school librarians and we love books, there's a series by Mira Grant called Newsflesh, and the first book is called Feed, and it's introduced with some characters, one of whom wants to be a journalist, and this is all taking place in a post-zombie world. And part of what has happened in this world is because of issues with reporting before, reporters now have to register what their biases are in order to get a journalistic license. And if they go against their stated biases, they can lose their journalistic license. I just find that a really interesting idea. That I don't want the zombie part, but man, would that be an interesting thing to see implemented in our own news situations. So all of this is kind of growing out of a course that I ended up creating for my middle school kids. And it sort of, I call it my secret library skills class because it wasn't really supposed to be about information literacy skills, but that's what it ended up being about. The class was called, Argument and Debate. And I had my supervisor for English come to me a couple of years ago and say, hey, we're going to create a new class called Argument Debate. We'd love it if you would write it and, give us some ideas because we know that you know a lot about this stuff. I was like, okay, great. That happened to coincide with the closing of the middle school library that in my school. So I had planned I got my degree in January 2019, planned to step in, and they closed the library. And then they said, hey, we're creating this course. I said, okay. And having just gotten all this information about information literacy, I figured this could be a really good chance, since the kids aren't going to have a library to get the skills from, I can maybe give them the skills through this class and kind of sneak them in with the other stuff we're talking about. And as I went along, I started to realize that there is so much overlap between the idea of arguing and debating and information literacy skills, which seems very obvious to a lot of people, but to me, it was a little bit of a, what? So, arguments are analyzing why people are doing what they're doing, why they're saying what they're saying, how they're saying what they're saying. What are their main reasons for saying what they're saying? Looking at different kinds of logic, emotion, ethical arguments that are being given, and how they affect us as listeners and how we can use them as arguers ourselves. Coming up with counter arguments, which means we've got to look at what the other side might be thinking or doing. So putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes, thinking about other perspectives on the issues. Critical thinking about how do I consider, how might they come at my side and how do I counter that? All the research that goes into getting prepared for an argument or a debate, that is absolutely 100% information literacy skills, thinking about how reliable a source is, trying to figure out what are some different perspectives on an issue, looking at databases versus open web searches. If we're going to do open web searches, how do we do them well so that we're not just getting the most popular results? Because as I told the kids for a while, unfortunately, this isn't true anymore, but it was fun while it was true. You could do a Google search for who invented running, and Google gives you the most popular answer. The most popular answer for quite a while when you typed in who invented running was, in 1846, Sir Thomas Running invented running when he accidentally walked twice. Obviously not true, but the most popular because it was kind of weird and funny. So thinking about, okay, open web, maybe not my best choice. I should probably use a database, but if I can't get to a database, how do I search well so that I'm not just getting Sir Thomas running. Thinking about citation, because we should be making sure that we are encouraging students to cite their sources when they're sharing information, but also to look for how are other people citing their sources. Because if they're not citing their sources, that might be a red flag. And if they are, we want to be able to go and look at those sources and figure out if we can rely on them or not. Plus, public speaking is a good skill. So that was part of our debate portion of the program. So these are, if you think about it, pretty much skills they're going to use in almost all of their classes. Critical thinking, trying to figure out where to find good information, trying to evaluate whether the information they're seeing is good or not, reliable or not, I should say. So not just for their classes, but also for their personal lives, these are skills that they should have. So information literacy is imperative for all of their learning and for all of their personal lives. So we've got to think about how we can bring this to them. So when I taught this course, the students really enjoyed having those skills and knowing that they were more empowered to find what they needed and find the stuff that was going to actually give them the right information. They also really enjoyed researching their topics because they got to do a little bit of choice. They had constrained choice. I had a list of topics they could choose to debate, and they got to kind of choose and then go digging. And they really enjoyed yelling back and forth at each other. They didn't yell usually, but they had a good time getting some debates going on. And I've got to say the teachers were thrilled. All of the 7th graders had to take this class. It became a required class for one marking period for all the 7th graders. So I ended up teaching all the 7th graders for a couple of years. And the teachers were amazed at how great the students were at applying these skills in these other classes. In history class particularly, where they did a lot of research papers, they loved it. English teachers loved that we were reinforcing skills or introducing skills. So I was able to send the teachers a letter basically saying, look, here's some of the skills that we went over so that your kids know this now when they come in as 8th graders. And a lot of you are going to have 7th graders who know about this stuff. So they really appreciated knowing, oh, here are specific things that the students are going to be able to walk away with. So it was really well received. And because of the way it was set up, I think it really worked effectively with the students, and I got to refine it quite a bit over a very short period of time. So the structure of the lessons, I tried to build each one basically in the same pattern, so there was some consistency. Usually there's an introductory video of some kind that seems like maybe or maybe not, it might be related to what we're going to talk about. Sometimes the kids go, wait, what does that have to do with anything? But there's always a tie-in some way. When we talked about introduction to search tips, the introductory video was Rube Goldberg Machine. And when we watched that, they were like, why are we watching this? I said, well, when you guys do searches, you go here, 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 and then you find the answer you're looking for. So the way you're searching now is the Rube Goldberg Machine. I'm going to show you how to get around that and just get to what you need. After we do the video, there's usually information about, here's what we're talking about today. Like, here's the specific topic. And sometimes there's a little bit of a summary of, okay, we talked about this before. We talked about this before. That leads us up to this. And then they will use the skills, use the knowledge that we're taking from that lesson in some sort of a practical hands-on way, usually to get them ready for the debate that they were going to do. And then there'd be some sort of a task or an exit ticket related to what we were talking about that day. So all the lessons are sort of structured along this pattern. There are 37 interrelated lessons, starting with the welcome and going all the way to some enrichment when we got to the end of our course. There's also some lessons that used to be part of the class, but then no longer were, but they were too good to throw out. So I kept those around. So you've got lots of options there. So if you come to this slide deck, here are the lessons. You click on this link, it's going to bring you to a folder, and this folder has all the lessons and the interrelated materials that go with them. They're all labeled. They're in the order that I think makes sense based on how I was teaching this. You might want to pick and choose out some stuff. You might want to rearrange. You are more than welcome to copy, change, do what you need to do to make them fit what you need. You'll notice that while they are all numbered, the X lessons at the end those are the extras that no longer quite fit, but there's some really great stuff in here depending on what kind of lessons you're doing. Some of it is very specific to Jersey because I'm in New Jersey, but a lot of it is just stuff that would be useful and valuable. In fact, there's one in here about how to build your own search engine. Google offers you a great free, easy to use way to build a search engine that only looks at the sites you tell it to look at. And I shared that the other day, and somebody was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. I can use this with my faculty to help set up some project stuff that they're going to do. I was like, yes, absolutely. This is not just for kids. So hopefully there's something in here that you can take advantage of. What it really all boils down to, there's a whole bunch of lessons here, but it really comes down to two main things. I think we've got to think about context, and we've got to think about perspective. Those are the two key takeaways from, I think, all of the lessons. We've got to think about what's the bigger picture that this information we're looking at is part of, and what is the sort of stance or point of view of the source of the information. And whether it's us providing the information or whether it's us taking in information, context and perspective kind of underlie all of the other information literacy principles, I would say. And if you don't think context matters, I love this clip from the Scooby-Doo movie because it really shows why context matters. And I don't know, I'm going to try this, and I bet you that it's not going to play the audio. I'm going to play it. If you don't hear the audio, let me know, because that's going to be useless without the audio. Yeah. Sorry, that's what I figured. All right, maybe with captions I'll sum up. So in the movie, we've got this reporter who keeps reporting on the mystery gang, and she is against them, and she wants to make them look bad. So she keeps doing these interviews with Fred from the mystery gang, and every time she cuts the interview in such a way that it changes what Fred's saying. He's trying to say that he loves this town that they're in and he wants to help them, but she ends up cutting the way he speaks to make it sound like he's saying that the town is terrible and, you know, he doesn't need them. And the context, because he's being taken out of context. In fact, he even says here, that's out of context. That, I think, really is a great illustration, especially for our students, to show why context matters. Because when you take out just a piece, you can really change the overall impression of something, right? So context matters, but also perspective matters. This is just one picture from a series. The first one is a picture of a cylinder, and it shows that if you look at a cylinder from one direction, it looks like a circle. And if you look at a cylinder from another direction, it looks like a square or a rectangle. And both of those things are true. It's true that if you look at it from one direction, it does look like a circle. And if you look at it from another way, it does look like a square. But the truth is that you need to pull back and see from different perspectives to understand that maybe there's not just one way to look at this. And in fact, this last image argues that maybe there's more than just two ways to look at an issue. Because a lot of times we get there's one side and there's the other side, or there's your side, there's my side, and there's the truth. But in reality, a lot of times there's so many different ways of looking at something. It's not just this or that. It could be a lot of different things. And until we pull back far enough to get the full context so that we can get a good perspective on the whole issue, we may not be able to see what's really going on. So let's check out a couple of lessons here real quick. So this is from lesson 5. And it's logos, the logical arguments, not logos like the things on your TV or on your car or whatever, not like your sport logos. So we had already talked about in previous lessons what arguments are. So this is just a quick reminder. We talked about why more arguments are better. We talked about core arguments. So core arguments are like, here are the main reasons people are going to use to try and convince you of something. And these seem to apply very universally to a lot of different kinds of arguments. So that's why we call them the core arguments. And we already talked about pathos in a different lesson. So now we're up to logos. And in the lessons, I've gone through and highlighted the parts that the kids had to write in their notes. And I do mean physically write in their notes, because we've got research that shows when kids write stuff physically, it goes into their brain in a different way than when they're just keyboarding something in. So I had them writing notes so that they would know this stuff, lodge it in their brain a little bit. We talk about how logical arguments focus on facts, statistics, or comparisons between one thing and another thing, right? So with that in mind, we look at a couple of different commercials. And so there's this Nissan Leaf commercial that really does a great job of helping us see the difference between logical arguments and not logical arguments, because throughout the entire commercial, it shows this pop-up bubble that says fact, and there's a narrator who is narrating. And sometimes the narration matches what's in the commercial, and sometimes it doesn't. When it matches what's in the commercial, the narrator is saying things that are facts. When it doesn't, it's saying things that go with the fact that's on the screen, but that frame it in a different way so that the narrator is speaking subjectively instead of objectively. And it's a really interesting little mix here. And I'll show you some of that in a second.
Steve, hey,
Yep.
It's Christina. I'm just going to pop in. Before you present, click the little toggle that says allow sound, because these people didn't hear your last video.
Appreciate that.
So you get out of presentation mode, go back in and click. You have to do that for Zoom. Isn't that annoying?
It is. Oh, there it is. Sorry. I thought I clicked it and I missed it. Thank you for the pointer. I appreciate that. Let me do this again. And now
a lot of folks who really loved the last video.
It's a fun video. So let's check this one out, and hopefully you'll be able to hear this one. And I'm going to, again, audience participation. I'm going to ask you to see what you can notice about what's going on. I already gave you some clues. I don't usually give the students clues. So we're going to see.
Fact. On average, we drive less than 30 miles per day. The 100% electric Nissan Leaf can go 2.5 times that on a single charge. Leaf is powerful, comfortable, and safe. And Leaf can save you over $4,300 in gas. Get a $289 lease plus $1,000 home charger allowance. Offer ends September 4th. Visit choosenissan.com. Hurry in to your local Nissan dealer. Fact. You'll never buy gas again.
So I'm going to actually start at the end and work backwards a little bit here. At the very end, they've got the fact bubble that pops up. You'll never buy gas again. And the narrator says, fact, you'll never buy gas again. And that's absolutely true when you're buying an electric car, because if you put gasoline in an electric car, that'd be bad. But it's kind of like saying, fact, if you buy our toaster, you'll never have to buy gasoline. That's true, but it's sort of kind of unrelated, but they make it seem like it's kind of related. And yes, it's a car, but it's a little bit off topic. So let me back it up here. And in this very first part, here we go. Average daily drive, 29 miles. Is that a fact? Yes or no? What do we think?
It has the stat from 2009 below.
Okay, so it's got a statistic down. It's got the source down here, right? So it's telling us, okay, this is where we got this information from. So yes, fact, it's a ballpark, but they're giving us where it came from, right? So, okay, great.
The 100% electric Nissan Leaf can go 2.5 times.
Is it a fact that this car can go 2.5 times 29 miles? And again, if we look carefully down the bottom here, we've got some text explaining, here's how we came up with that, right? So, okay, fact, great. This next part.
That on a single charge. Leaf is powerful.
Sorry, I stopped it too quickly. Listen carefully to what he's saying and look at what the text is on the screen and see if you can notice what's going on in this next little bit here. There's 3 bits.
On a single charge. Leaf is powerful, comfortable, and safe.
It goes real quick. Let me back it up one more time.
Charge. Leaf is powerful, comfortable, and safe.
Do you notice anything? Let's give it one more time.
Single charge. Leaf is powerful, comfortable, and safe.
Closed course, professional driver. This is absolutely true. We've got a little note here down the bottom when it says that it goes, okay, that's a good one. Ellen, yes, I absolutely will show you where the link is for that. Yes, comfort is subjective. So it says Leaf is powerful, and it says it goes 0 to 60 in 10 seconds. Any car people, can you tell me, is 0 to 60 in 10 seconds? Is that good for a car?
No.
No, that's slow as all. That's pokey. That's like having a hamster under the hood. Anybody know what kind of car this is right here? Here's our Nissan Leaf. We got a Camaro with a V8 engine. That's a sports car. That goes 0 to 60 in about 3.4 seconds. So it's about 3 times faster off the line than the Nissan Leaf is. And yet, there's something really, really tricky that they're doing with this powerful section. Not only are they saying powerful, which is a subjective word and is not matching the fact that it's a pokey car, but watch what they do with the video. It's super quick. It's super fast. See if you can spot it.
Single charge. Leaf is powerful.
It's right there. I'm going to do it again. See if you can see it. And I did not notice this until about the 40th time I watched this video, but see if you can catch it.
Single charge. Leaf is powerful.
One more time.
On a single charge. Leaf is powerful.
The Leaf gets a head start. Not only does the Leaf get a head start, they actually cut the video and they cut out a section of the Leaf accelerating so that not only is the Leaf getting a head start, they also don't show
Leaf is powerful.
how long it takes it to actually get across. Yes, to get across that intersection. It's edited to make it look like the Leaf is going faster than it is. And the Camaro, that person must be really frustrated. That's got to be like somebody pushing that car because it's not barely moving. So they're editing the video so that what we see matches the idea of it being a powerful car. But the fact that they're putting on the screen is different than the fact words that they're putting on the screen are different than the images that they're showing us and the wording that we are hearing as it goes on. And then it says comfortable, and it says
Comfortable.
the Leaf seats 5. But if you look, are there 5 people in this car? There sure aren't. There are 4. And I love to have the students get up and put them in the configuration they would have to be in to be 5 people in a Leaf. And they're shoulder to shoulder crushed up against each other. I'm like, you guys all comfortable now? No. So when we can actually think about what we're being presented with, yes, it's a fact that you could jam 5 people into this car. Are they going to be comfortable? No, they sure aren't. So the words that are being said are subjective, while the facts they're giving us are objective. So it's powerful, comfortable, and the last one is safe. Nissan Leaf is powerful, comfortable, and safe. It's got a 5-star overall safety rating, but does that make it a safe car? And I asked the students who are 7th graders, if you got behind the wheel of this and we're driving down the parkway, would that be a safe car? No, what? No, we can't drive. I was like, exactly. So the word safe is another value word that's being used to manipulate how we're feeling about what we're seeing. So we've got all this stuff jammed into this real short. It's a 30-second commercial. But it really helps the students to see facts versus not facts when people are trying to convince them of things. Now, I think Nissan might have gotten some pushback on this commercial because later on, they came out with another commercial for Nissan Leaf. And this one does much better with actually sticking to facts. So let's see how they do in this.
Fact, the 100% electric Nissan Leaf is more fun than ever, sees better than ever, charges faster, and will charge, cool, and heat from your phone. Fact, Leaf never needs gas, ever. Good for the world, built in America. Now Leaf's an easier choice than ever. Shop at ChooseNissan.com.
Again, 30-second spot. And in this one, they did a much better job of what the person is saying either matches what's on the screen or is a very close approximation. A whole lot less wiggle room, a whole lot less subjective language. But there is still an emotional argument going on in this commercial. Did anybody notice the story that's being told with this commercial? Let's watch it one more time.
Fact, the 100% electric Nissan Leaf is more fun than ever, sees better than ever, charges faster, and will charge, cool, and heat from your phone. Fact, Leaf never needs gas, ever. Good for the world, built in America. Now Leaf's an easier choice than ever. Shop at Choose Nissan.
Allie saw it. Allie saw it. So there's a story being told while this commercial is going on between this couple that's going out on a date. And one of the things I love is that, you get the story of they're going out to dinner, right? They start out, they park at the restaurant so we can see the parking features. Then they go inside the restaurant and the guy can use his phone to get the car ready for when they're done after. And then they go on a romantic drive down the coast at night. And then they go and they park at a beautiful scenic overlook. But my favorite part is the expression on this woman's face when she uses her remote to turn on the climate in the car. And then after she turns on the heating feature in the car, she gives him this look and say, "Hey gang, what's going on in this scene? What's this a prelude to?" And they all go, "Oh, so that's right. They're going to get smoochy. There's smooching going on." That's not a logical argument, but man, it's this really effective background, subtle moment, right? Sex sells. Now, I don't say sex sells to the seventh graders, but we know that that is something that's going on here, that they are using in this commercial. So they've improved the match between what's being narrated and what's being written on the screen, but they've added in a whole storyline in the background that's meant to influence us a bit. One last commercial. We've got a iPhone commercial here. We're not going to watch this one. It's way more factual than either one of the other ones, but it has some really bouncy music. It's got really pretty people, and it's got a couple of places where it's where they cut the video down to make it look better than it would in real life. And they've got little text at the bottom that you can barely see that says this video has been edited. So Apple does a better job of being factual about their stuff, but they do a great job of tying in emotional elements to try and get us excited about their phone. So we watch those. We're going to skip over that. We talk about how they incorporate these different things. We talk about why logical arguments are beneficial, why we would want to try and use them. We also talk about how logical arguments can have some drawbacks if we're not careful, because we know that people are more likely to follow their emotions than logic, unfortunately, even though we may think that we are more logical than emotional. So we've got to be aware of that, and we've got to think about whether the information can be trusted and whether it's built on flawed logic or not. And then we've got examples, and we talk about what's good or not good about these logical arguments. And there are some explanations. And then I want to just jump a little bit ahead here. So we've got some arguments here, and this is one of my favorites. You won't find any deer along this road. In 25 years of driving the same route, I haven't seen a single one. So this is presented as a logical argument, right? We've got facts, we've got data, 25 years. But is it a good argument? And sometimes it takes the students a little bit to kind of work through what some of the issues are. But there's definitely some issues here. You won't find any deer along this road. In 25 years of driving the same route, I haven't seen a single one. And one of the students one time said, "But how many times have they driven on that road in 25 years? Good question. We don't know. Maybe they've driven on that road once or twice. We don't know what time of day they drive, because if they're driving in the middle of the day, much less likely to see a deer. We don't know how observant they are. We don't know whether they're legally blind. We don't know when they say driving the same route, whether they're the ones that are driving or whether they're in the passenger seat looking at their phone." So there's a lot of potential flaws in this. So we can point out that sometimes people are going to give us what seem like logical arguments, and they may not stand up to careful observation. We also talk about how data and statistics can be manipulated or misrepresented. And so we talk about that graph that we looked at before. So, and then they've got their exit ticket where they're going to actually come up with some arguments that are going to help them do the debate that they're going to do later on. So that way, and this is what the document basically looks like. They start with a proposition. They start with a couple of different ones, and they winnow it down as we go through the class. And they have to come up with some arguments and some questions that would give them facts about their arguments. So they are applying the skills as we go. And you can spend as long or as little time as you want with each one of those commercials. I usually would spend quite a while because we had an hour-long class, and I wanted to really have them dig into it and see it for themselves, and just stepping back and letting them do it for themselves. So that's a great one. We talk about information literacy and reliable sources. We're getting a little short on time, so I'm going to skip over these. But the build your own search engine one, like I mentioned, great, easy to do. Google lets you build your own CSE, custom search engine. And those instructions are all here. You could share them with students or staff, and they're super easy to do. I just want to share this video because it's fun. I always think of the internet like a fire hose of information. And I say,
you get to drink from the fire hose!
You get all excited, you can go on our devices, and you can go online. And you go to our favorite social media site.
Okay, you ready? Yeah! Open wide!
That's what the information on the internet is like. There's too much of it to take in all at once. So anyway, there's some talk about filter bubbles and how to think about what we're doing when we set up our own search engines. And then there are actual directions on here's how you do it. And I've actually made several different ones for my students. I've made current events ones that only draw information from reliable sources, so I know they're going to get good information. One of our classes was doing, they had to do research on US government laws. So I put together a page for them that would only search .gov sites. Holocaust research, I got them some good reliable sources for that. So, and you can make these for any topic you want. I have the students, when they're just playing around with them, make ones that they just are interested in. So I've got kids doing like a sports information search. I've got one, I had a kid do one on sneakers because he loves sneakers. You could do one for books you might like. And you can put in whatever website you want into this. And when you type in what you're looking for, it'll only give you results from those sources. So it's a really handy tool to be able to build your own search engine, either for you, for your students, or for your staff. I also got a lot of ideas. So one thing I forgot to mention is that when I was teaching this class, I was teaching it 3 times a day for 1 marking period at a time over 4 marking periods for the year. So I ended up over the course of 2.5 years teaching this a whole lot of times. And every time I taught it, I kind of did a little bit of shifting and changing and adding and rearranging. I got feedback from the students and added and changed stuff depending on that. So there are some lessons that aren't necessarily part of the progression that I have now that I still think could be useful for different situations. Like one on misleading information talks about reverse image searches. And I actually got this information from the News Literacy Project, which has some great free resources, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it's super easy to do a reverse image search. This is an example that they shared that this picture was used as part of a international news broadcast about children fighting in an uprising against their government. And it's actually a picture that's from a video game. It's not a real picture, but it's easy to use reverse image searching, especially in Chrome, to find out where a picture came from. This one was super popular a couple of years ago when Texas was freezing over and there was all sorts of problems. There were a lot of people online saying, well, Texas is freezing and we're out of power. We lost our power for so long because we were forced by government regulation to start getting rid of our fossil fuels. And if we'd had fossil fuels, it wouldn't be a problem. And now we've got these turbines and look, the turbines are freezing over and But if you actually do a reverse image search on this, this picture is not from Texas 2 years ago. It's from Oslo 5 years ago. So not connected in any way. But when we take an image out of context, it's really easy to label it however you want to label it. And Chris is absolutely right. You can also click the 3 dots on a Google image to see more info. So they're starting to add a lot more features to make it easier to find out where information is coming from. One of the problems is all this stuff is happening online and screens make it really easy to be anonymous and to depersonalize. So it's almost like we're not even connecting with another human being when we put out some of this information. We kind of forget sometimes that there are human beings that are being affected by what we share, what we take in, what they share. So it's really easy to spread this misinformation without worrying about any of the consequences that might happen. But I mentioned good digital citizenship earlier because I think if we've got good digital citizens, they have to be using good information literacy skills, because we need students who can differentiate between reliable and unreliable information. We need them to know about click hygiene, not just clicking on repost or clicking on share or clicking on whatever link pops in front of them, and thinking before they click, thinking before they share. And they've got to cite their sources, right? Those are information literacy skills. But when we do that, it means that we're sending less misinformation out into the world, which is a good digital citizenship skill. We shouldn't be trying to fill the digital world with misinformation. So in addition to the lessons that are here, there's also a couple of other resources you might want to take advantage of. The News Literacy Project is an amazing free resource. Full disclosure, I am now a news literacy ambassador, and I am happy to talk about their stuff because I love it. It's free, and it's the highest quality free stuff I've ever seen in my life. It's the highest quality stuff I've seen on this topic anywhere, and it's free. They have a weekly newsletter that comes with a pre-made lesson ready to go. It has a whole bunch of topics to discuss. Or you can get into their Checkology interactive online lessons that you can set up a course for students to go into and take. You can either walk them through it as a class or they can do it individually. It's really amazing. And they've got free webinars and all sorts of other stuff. So links are here if you want to look into that some more. There's also some great information literacy games. Kids love to play games anytime we can gamify. Factitious is fun. Bad news is one that the students really love. They get to pretend that they are starting a misinformation empire on a social media site. And it walks them through, here are ways to get more followers by doing these unethical things. And by doing that, it shows them, here's how you get manipulated on social media. And there's a couple of other ones that are pretty fun here too. Science Versus Podcast is a really wonderful podcast that is not necessarily about information literacy, but they look at current events through a science lens, and they try and debunk any issues that are floating around out there related to science. And they always provide a list of citations for their sources to talk about, here's where we found the information that tells us what we're talking about is true or not. So it's a really great resource. There's a great multimedia article by the Washington Post from a couple of years ago that shows different ways that images can be manipulated online, especially video. All Sides, great free resource. They show you headlines from left-leaning, center-leaning, right-leaning sources and let you compare them right on their site. They also do comparisons of news sources to tell you what their biases are, and they use a blind rating system for that. It's really great. They've got the media bias chart. Let me just show you real quick. So media bias chart shows you, here's center sources, here's left-leaning, here's right-leaning, here's far left, here's far right. And what's interesting is that some of these, you'll see the same name pop up in a couple of places because they would talk about a source having, like, New York Times opinion is far left, but New York Times news is just left, because opinion is often different than their news reporting. So it's got a great, when you have students really look at it carefully, they can start to pick out some stuff like that. It's really a great way for them to get a sense of what's going on. Ground News is a freemium source that what I love about it is it has a blind spot analysis. So it sends you, here's a story that the left isn't reporting on much. Here's a story that the right isn't reporting on much. Here's some other news that you may have missed. Paid subscriptions offer a little more tailoring, but for free, they send you some basics, which is great. And just as a, I don't know that this would be for students necessarily, but for us to think about or for us to share with our staff, the We Were Three podcast is about a family who basically a father and a brother died because of COVID misinformation. I mean, again, talk about how misinformation can be deadly. So that's the stuff that I've got. I'm happy to answer questions. These are some ways that you can get in touch with me. That is in the slides, and here is where you can get the slides with all of the links and all of the stuff. So if you have questions, please feel free, jump in. Now's a great time. We're getting a little short on time, and I know you're going to go to something awesome next. So if you want to throw something in, go for it. My pleasure. I'm glad folks feel like they're getting something useful. That's great. I love it. If you do end up finding that you've got some questions later on, do feel free to reach out. I love talking school library. I love talking information literacy. If the link's not, so you've got to make sure you use all lowercase, getinfolit, bit.ly/getinfolit, and then it should go right there. And if it's still giving you an issue, do feel free to reach out to me on Blue Sky or Twitter or wherever, or via email. You're more than welcome. hopefully. Great. Awesome. I love that folks feel like they found something that might be useful for them to use. Hopefully you can get some, I don't know if you can walk in, well, not tomorrow. Hopefully you're not going to school tomorrow, but if you're going on Monday, hopefully there's something you can get ready to drop your students right into. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. There are some amazing sessions that are going to be coming your way. I know I'm excited. I hope you're excited too. I'm going to stop our share here. And hopefully I will see you all in the not too distant future. Take care, everybody.